Hello.
Yes, sir.
Hold on a second, man. We're live here. Bret Jazz Video Guy. Another edition of our Jazz Video Guy. Another edition of our Jazz Video Guy Live Daily Chats. Today we
Yes, sir.
are joined by a very special guest, my friend Willard Jenkins. We're going to talk about a number of things, including
Yes.
his work with Randy Weston, his jazz advocacy, jazz video guy. Look forward to your questions for Willard. We'll be looking at some video of the great Randy Weston and another surprise that I think you'll So, let's get started.
At its foundation, jazz is more of an aesthetic than it is a style of or form of music. And I say that because of different branches and these different sounds like you just mentioned. And this openness that you just mentioned, this openness to change, this constant quest of certain musicians who play this music to change and to find new ways of playing it. So really what it is it's an aesthetic umbrella under which there are all these different forms and ways of playing the music. And, there's no one way to play this music, and that's one of the beauties of the music. The fact that it can mean so many things to so many different people. You can get a room of even people who identify themselves as enthusiasts. You can get a room full of enthusiasts together, and you can go around the room and ask them, well, what is jazz to you? And you can get 20 different answers, if not more. So, it does have that openness, and that's because of the nature of the music and the fact that the musicians who play this music, who play it well, are constantly questing and looking for new ways and new things to incorporate, new experiences to incorporate in their playing.
WPFW, Washington.
Willard Jenkins has covered jazz artists, performances, and the jazz infrastructure since his early 70s undergrad days writing for the Black Watch student newspaper at Kent State University. Willard has long been an important voice in DC jazz in the most literal sense. He's a longtime announcing talent on jazz radio station WPFW. He's also been a major contributor to jazz journalism and arts presentation, as a consultant to both the Mid-Atlantic Jazz Festival and the Smithsonian Institution. His influence extends beyond the district, too. He's taught at Kent State University, is the co-author of pianist Randy Weston's autobiography African Rhythms, and was also artistic director of the Tri-C Jazz Fest in Cleveland. He currently serves as artistic director of the DC Jazz Festival and artistic director of jazz programming at Tribeca Performing Arts Center NYC, a founding member of the Jazz Journalists Association. He is also a recipient of its Lifetime Achievement Award.
And good evening. At 10:06 on this Wednesday, November 13th, it's the Ancient Future edition of WPFW's Night Jazz. Good evening, I'm Willard Jenkins, your host from now until midnight.
We're going to change the mood and take you on another little trip. We call this High Fly.
Randy Weston and his jazz standard composition I absolutely love, High Fly, which I first heard on the Cannonball Adderley recording live in San Francisco we were talking about the other day. Well, we're going to learn a lot more about Randy today and Willard's collaboration with Randy, but let's jump over to something that is kind of life and death for me, and that's the survival of this music through the COVID nightmare that we're all living through. Now, Willard Jenkins is spearheading I don't know, say a campaign, but an effort to present the music on the web, a festival whose archived concerts, and starting tomorrow night, Saturday, May 2nd, the Kenny Garrett Quintet is going to be available on demand as part of the DC Jazz Fest home series. Willard, perhaps you could say something about that. Hello, Willard.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can.
All right. Well, the DC Jazz Fest from Home series is from the archives of DC Jazz Festival performances down through the years. And those programs will be on Saturday evenings at 7 p.m. And they'll be broadcast on the DC Jazz Festival YouTube channel. And this Saturday, May 2nd, is the great alto saxophonist, Kenny Garrett.
Yeah, when is that from, Willard? Is that a recent performance?
Yeah. And they'll be That's from our festival in June 2017.
Willard, we're picking up some background there. Are you watching the show on at the same time? You got to lower the volume. Otherwise, we're going to get some good feedback here.
I did that.
Okay, excellent. So how has the DC Jazz Festival, you were scheduled to go up in June. Was it the fourth year or the third year since you've been involved?
Well, I've been involved since 2015.
Okay, so a long time now. When you found out about COVID, how did the festival maneuver to go through this crisis?
Well, we decided to postpone the festival back on March 15th. We postponed our June festival, and we're hopeful of having our festival in September. But of course, in this world that we're living in now, it won't be quite the same just because of social distancing and because of the continued threat of COVID-19. Last year, for example, last June 2019, during our festival is a 10-day event, and it's citywide. And I emphasize the fact that it's citywide because we incorporate a lot of the venues around town which present jazz during the year. And we bring them into the big tent as part of the festival. And so we present our music in neighborhoods across DC. In fact, if you know DC, DC is separated into 4 quadrants: southeast, southwest, northeast, and northwest. We're literally in all 4 quadrants of the city, and we're at parks, museums, recreation centers, churches, in addition to jazz clubs and restaurants. And we culminate at a new development on the Potomac River called the Wharf. It's a beautiful new development, restaurants and the whole bit, a lot of nightlife. And we have a multi-stage scene at the Wharf. We have 3 stages. And last year, on the Saturday of our culminating weekend, it's a Saturday-Sunday weekend, and it's free. Last year, our culminating weekend on Saturday, we had 80,000 people on Saturday. And obviously, considering social distancing, we can't bring that measure of the music to the community because of social distancing. So what we're going to do in September is going to be on a smaller scale, but we will have a presence in terms of having the DC Jazz Festival in 2020.
Well, that's some really good news. We've been following the DC Jazz Festival since Charlie Fishman introduced it. Oops, here we go. The top of your head is cut off, Willard. You did a blog posting recently. Willard has a website called, is it Open Sky Jazz or just Open Sky?
Yeah, it's openskyjazz.com.
Okay, openskyjazz.com. Willard has a blog on there, and you was talking. Willard, I'm picking up something in the background. I don't know what you're doing, but if you put
no, I have no. There's absolutely no sound in this background.
Okay, maybe mine.
Right.
Maybe I need to get some headphones. Where are they? Headphones. Okay. All right. Hello. Oh boy. Can't wear these headphones with this hat. Okay. I'm back. Sorry about that. Yeah, so Willard is a blog, and he did a posting recently about the audience development factor in this music. You know, we've seen a jazz education in my lifetime. Jazz education was like Stan Kenton stage camps and Berkeley and, North Texas State. Very little jazz education. 50 years later, jazz education is one of the major things happening in jazz all over the planet. Young musicians are being introduced to the music. People are getting turned on to it. The spirit of it, the joy of it is being picked up. So jazz education, tremendous success. But question for you, Willard. How can we really grow the audience?
Well, the first factor in growing the audience for the music is simply increasing exposure of the populace to the music. And we do that in a variety of ways, but I think obviously it starts in our education system. I made the point in that editorial on the subject of audience development, which I posted on Open Sky Jazz earlier this week. I made the point, or tried to make the point, that I have had a lot of experience teaching this music on the college and university level, and teaching jazz history courses and jazz appreciation courses. And invariably, at the end of those courses, I have so many students have said that words to the effect that the particular course opened them up to a new world of music, a music that they didn't previously know existed. So, we're not reaching as many people as we should with this music. And that's what I mean by exposure. It's just a simple fact that we have so many people that don't really know this music. And as a result, they have a sense that they need to understand something in order to come to this music. Or some even have the feeling they need to belong to something in order to be a part of this music, because those of us who are immersed in this music, we have somewhat of a tendency to keep it close to the vest, as though we know a certain secret that others do not. But we need to be more welcoming to those outside of our so-called jazz circle, as far as bringing more people in and introducing more people to the music. Because I think this is not a music necessarily for mass consumption, as we know popular music to be, but this is certainly a music which could have a much broader audience than it has now. And the reason it doesn't have that broader audience is due to simple lack of exposure for a lot of people.
Yeah, that's true. But let me ask you this.
Yeah.
The internet, YouTube, offers unlimited selection of jazz, and both audio and video. People put up entire albums, and a lot of performance video. I put some up myself, and a lot of interviews and everything. So I think the internet seems to be working. Do we need more venues, Willard? What do you think it is that's people are going to be able to do that?
Those resources that you mentioned, they are there, and they are plentiful. There are plenty of opportunities for people to experience the music simply online. But if you don't know what you're looking for, or if you don't know that you want to hear a certain thing, how are you going to seek it out? If someone hasn't pulled your coat to the fact that, oh, there's a wealth of music under this umbrella we know of as jazz, there's a wealth of music and a wealth of different ways of playing and a wealth of different styles. Because jazz, as I said, it's an aesthetic umbrella under which all these different forms and styles of playing exist. Jazz is not one style of music. And so, we've got to get people to the point where they recognize all those resources that you mentioned are out there. It's like, let's say, for example, you have a project that you want to complete at home, as a lot of people are doing these days, in their home environment. You have a project you want to complete. Well, perhaps there's resources online that can help you complete that project. But you may not know that unless someone has informed you of that, or unless you've gone out on your own to discover those kinds of things. So, yes, we have the resources online, etc., but people need to know what they're looking for and listening for. And as far as venues, there are plenty of venues. The issue is to keep those venues alive. And as a result of keeping those venues alive, we'll be growing those venues and creating a demand for new venues. Because again, if people don't know that there's a music out there that they may have some interest in, how are they going to go to it? How are they going to know to go to it? Or how are they going to know where to go to listen to it?
Absolutely. But as we're seeing here, because of COVID, the venues aren't going to be in operation for a while. And when you think about walking down the steps into a basement and being so close to people as we do at the Village Vanguard, I don't know what's going to happen. But the situation we have right now, Willard, we have a lot of people, a lot of musicians, and just people in general, up on Facebook, putting up live sessions, asking for tips. Do you see anything aside from the need to communicate and share with the community? Is that in any way beneficial to bringing in a larger audience?
Well, one would hope so, because it at least creates a presence for the music in this online arena. It at least suggests that this music is one of the many vehicles that we can explore online. But again, it's about exposure, and it's about letting people know that these things exist and that these resources are out here. And I see a lot of musicians who are trying to do a lot of things to continue to develop their artistry online, and developing clever ways of bringing their music to the public, even despite this pandemic. Bringing the music online, there are certain artists who are doing daily performances from their home, and so these resources are out here.
Yeah, speaking of the daily performances, I've been watching Chick Corea every day. He's done a daily performance that can last up to an hour for a month now, and some great music on there. And Chick is a very special person. And the other day, he told a story about Roy Haynes. When he was a young pianist in New York, he met Roy, and Roy gave him a certain symbol. And Chick has kept that symbol and actually used it in his groups from Return to Forever to where he's playing with now. And he tells the story of the symbol. It's just an incredible story. And that's the thing about the internet and the web. It empowers people to be able to send out their message to an audience. The challenge is, how do you reach a larger audience? We're going to come back to that in a second, but before we go into our Randy Weston thing here, let's listen to and see a little more Randy Weston.
Went back to New York. About 1 month later, we got these letters from Morocco saying the Moroccan people are crazy about your music. They want you to come back. So I had no idea I was going to be in Morocco because, number one, the language was spoken, Arabic, Berber, French, Spanish, very little English, see. But the power of music is the original language, is music, right? So I went back and ended up staying 7 years. And that's when I discovered the Africans who were taken in slavery who had to cross the Sahara Desert. I discovered these bands, I discovered their music, the Ganawa people in particular in Morocco. So that really enriched my life.
Talk about the Ganawa people.
Yeah, the Ganawa people, they're originally from the great kingdoms of Songhai, Ghana, Mali, And during the invasion from the north, they were taking as slaves and soldiers up to the north. But they created a very powerful spiritual music. And so I first met them in 1967, and we've been together up until this day. Because when you hear this music, you hear the origin of blues, of jazz, and black church all at the same time. You realize that, in other words, what has Mother Africa contributed to America? What has the African people brought with them? Because when they were taken away, they had no instruments, no language, no nothing. How did they take these European instruments and create music? But when you hear the traditional people, you realize music began in Africa in the first place. And the music is so diverse because the continent itself is so diverse. So if you go to Sahara, you're going to have music of the Sahara. To the mountains, you have the music because African people create music based upon the way they live, their environment. So I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. So I was influenced by the Palladium, by the black church, by the blues. Mississippi, so where it's the foundation of what you do.
Can you play Blue Moses a little bit?
Of course.
Yeah. Willard, when did you first get turned on to Randy's music, and how did you come to work with him on the autobiography that he described you, The Arranger? It's called African Rhythms. Tell us about your relationship with the unique Randy Weston.
Well, the spark, in a project like this, sometimes there's a certain spark that develops certain things, So the spark for this particular project, working with Randy Weston, came in 1998 when Randy was at the Montreal Jazz Festival. And he did several evenings as what they call the invitation artists. And when they have invitation artists at the Montreal Jazz Festival, they invite an artist to come and do several nights of programs based on different projects that he or she has produced down through their careers. So they had Randy come and do several nights. And the first night was the evening after a recording session with a string orchestra in Montreal and with Melba Liston conducting and with a special trio that included Christian McBride on bass and Billy Higgins on drums. And that session became a record on Verve known as Earth Birth. So the first night of Randy's stint was with the stringed orchestra and the trio setting. And then the second night was a blues night to recreate an album that he made for Verve with Johnny Copeland. But Johnny Copeland was not able to make it. He was ill at the time. So Robert Jr. Lockwood, a great old blues man from Cleveland that I knew, came up and did that concert, and it was a beautiful night of the blues with Randy Weston. And then he did a night with his sextet. And I should back up because the first night of his stint at Montreal was a duo performance with David Murray, which was kind of a nice way the festival had a nice handoff, because David Murray was the other invitation artist that year, and he had done several nights of his different musics with the World Saxophone Quartet and other settings. And then he culminated his stint with a duo concert with Randy. So that became Randy's first night. And the second night was with strings. The third night was with his African Rhythms Band. And then he was scheduled, the third night was the blues, and then the African Rhythms Band. And then he was scheduled on a Saturday to do a concert with the Gnawa, which was an experience that my wife and I had not had. But as it turns out, we had been in Montreal for 10 days already. And that Saturday was the day that we were scheduled to go home. And as luck would have it, we weren't scheduled to leave until late afternoon. And so we had some time to kill after we checked out of the hotel. So we went down to the hotel that served as the press headquarters for the festival, because the people at the Montreal Jazz Festival had been very accommodating. So we wanted to thank them. So when we got there, the press woman says, "Oh, you're just in time." She says, "Randy Weston is about to give a press conference." So we said, "Oh, great. We'll sit for the press conference and check that out, and then we'll leave after that." So we sit there checking out the press conference, and after the press conference, my wife and I go up to Randy, and we're thanking him profusely for the beautiful evenings of music that we had just experienced of his. And we said, but unfortunately, we're not going to make your concert tonight, your culminating concert, because we have to leave. And he looked at us and he said, "What?" He said, "You can't leave." He said, "We're going to Africa tonight." That was going to be the night he was going to be playing with the Gnawa from Morocco. So he and I are standing there talking, and suddenly my wife eases away. I figure she has to go to the restroom or make a phone call or whatever the case may be. She comes back about 10, 15 minutes later. Randy and I are still standing there talking, and she says, "We're staying. We're going to the concert tonight. I just got us our flight changed to the next day and got us back into the hotel. So we're staying." So we stayed. And Randy and my relationship just kind of developed from there. And at a certain point, I did some contract work for the old International Association for Jazz Education. It was a combo pack of IAJE and the National Endowment for the Arts, I did some work, excuse me, using the artists who had been designated NEA Jazz Masters up to that point. They wanted to develop a web presence. This is back when everybody was interested in developing some presence on the web, and we see how that's exploded. So part of the whole thing, they wanted a web page for each of the NEA Jazz Masters that would include an extensive biography, a bibliography, and a videography of resources that the general public could tap into if they went to that site. So when I was developing the bibliographies for the various artists, I was surprised at how few of the NEA Jazz Masters had actually had books written about them. And it was during a time when I decided I wanted to start writing books, my own books. I had contributed to other books previously. And so, I started thinking about Randy Weston. He was not at that time yet, he had not yet been designated an NEA Jazz Master. But I started thinking about him and our developing relationship, and I knew that there was no book on Randy Weston. So I talked to his music director, saxophonist TK Blue, Talib Kibwe, also known as TK Blue. And I said, you think Randy would be interested in having his book written? And he got excited. He said, Randy's been talking about that. Let me ask him. So we went back to Randy, and Randy was wide open to the possibility. So he and I forged this agreement to develop this book. And it's funny because I was just looking through one of my journals about that whole project. And it was clear from my initial research on Randy Weston, that he and I were going to have to go to Morocco at some point, because Morocco was so very important to Randy's story. And so, knowing that we were going to have to go to Africa at some point, he made an arrangement, and on May 30th, 2001, my father had passed like 2 weeks before that. And so I had just gotten back from all of the arrangements and whatnot, the service for my father in Cleveland. And so May 30th was Memorial Day. I'm off work that day, so I'm just sitting in my living room kind of reflecting on my dad and on various things. And the phone rings. And it's Randy Weston. And he says, "Are you ready to go to Africa?" And so I'm thinking to myself, okay, this guy's just calling to pull my leg and whatnot. So I'll play along with the joke. I said, "Yeah, sure, I'm ready." He said, "Well, we leave next Thursday." What happened was, some Moroccan television guys had determined that they wanted to do a documentary film. And to my knowledge, it's never come out, but they wanted to do a documentary film on Randy and his unique relationship with the Moroccan people, particularly the Gnawa musicians from the Gnawa Brotherhood. And so they wanted to bring him there for about 10 days to record various footage of him moving around Morocco, moving around primarily Fez and Marrakesh and Essaouira. And they wanted to also film a Gnawa ceremony. And so he told them, he said, "Yes, I'd like to do that." He says, but you need to bring my writer as well, because we had decided, we had started on the interviews for the book. And so he insisted that it needed to bring me as well on the trip. So that immersion with Randy in Morocco was really life affirming for me, and really got the book launched. the book project really got launched from that particular trip, because during that trip, I had done some interviews with Randy at his home in Brooklyn, but Randy was a much loved man. So we'd be sitting there having an interview. All of a sudden the door would knock, somebody would knock at the door, and here comes somebody coming to see Randy. Or the phone would ring incessantly, people wanting to talk with Randy. But this trip to Morocco gave us a chance to be away from that and to be in relative isolation and to do extensive day-long interviews, because during that trip, during the daytime, we would do these extensive interviews, and that became really the foundation for the book. And so
yeah,
the book actually took 9 years, and nine. Yes, you see, the thing is that when you tell everybody that you're writing a book, when you tell your friends and your associates you're writing a book, you realize that thereafter, every time you see them, somebody's going to say, well, how's the book coming? When's the book coming out? When can I read the book? And we had, and it was the same way with Randy and his friends and associates. So we had to tell folks, neither one of us was retired. We were both still working for our living, our respective livings. And so it's not like this was a full-time pursuit, developing this book. So that's why it took time. And in retrospect, I'm very happy it took as long as it did, because it enabled me to have several different great journeys with Randy to different parts of the world, to do further interviews with him and with some of his associates and associated musicians and some of his loved ones. So it really kind of broadened the project, and I'm glad it wasn't something that was necessarily on a fast track.
yeah. Well, definitely, creativity can't be rushed, and the fact that you were able to take all that time, I think that's why it came out so good. Let's jump to a video of Randy here, where he talks a little bit about his African connection.
I spent many wonderful years in Morocco, and especially with the Ganawa people. And they come from originally around the area of Mali, of Ségou, Bambara, that period, and they were taken to Morocco, and they came as people who brought a great deal of spirituality from the west to the north. And we spent many years with them, and they do some incredible things with music. They play games with music. They do acrobats with music. They do healing with music. They say that every human being has a color, every human being has a note. And when you become ill, it means that you're out of tune with Mother Nature. So they play certain sounds to bring you back to Mother Nature. Because as great as man and woman that we are, we're still part of Mother Nature. We can't get away. We're connected, as Dr. Chandler points out in his writings. We're connected to the bees and the birds, and we're all connected together. It's correspondence, as you said so beautifully, that correspondence, So I heard this instrument in Tangier, Morocco. It's called a gimbri. Some call it time it's called a hajouj. It's their spiritual instrument, and they play colors. And when they play this particular color, the people dress in that color. If it's a white color or a blue color or a yellow color. And then you dance to the spirit of the music to get you spiritually healthy again. And this is the power of a traditional music, which I've discovered all over Africa. And a lot of traditional music, the music is created in the communities to give the people spiritual healing. Because spiritual healing can give you other kinds of health in your body, Why are we on the planet? What are we here for? What's the purpose of music? Why are we here together? It's a beautiful story. We're going to feature our great bassist from Panama, Mr. Alex Blake. We're going to play for you the color blue. We call it Blue Moses.
Wow, incredible. I've been a Alex Blake fan since I saw him with McCoy. And also, I've put up some videos recently of Alex Blake with Stan Getz. He's a very versatile musician and has a very distinctive, unique sound. Well, there's a question I must ask you here. You talked about going to Africa with Randy. As an African American man, what is it like to go to Africa?
I was getting some feedback from the broadcast, and I got there's a little bit of a disconnect. But repeat that question for me, please.
What is it like for an African American man to go back to Africa?
Oh, it was incredible. It was incredible, and it was that same year was really an immersion in Africa for me, because that same year I was working with a film crew for BET Jazz to do a film on the forts and castles of Ghana, which, as many know, the forts and castles of Ghana were slave quarters, and they were the final point before the embarkation in the Middle Passage to the West. And so I was doing that documentary, and also had this opportunity before that even took place to make this trip to Morocco with Randy. And the interesting sidebar of that trip is the fact that there are some people that don't think of North Africa in the same vein as they do of West, Central, and South Africa. But North Africa it's all Africa. And that was something that was really brought home by that first trip to Morocco, because I had no idea that Morocco was essentially black, brown, and beige. And the fact that there are, it is such a very African place. It is Africa, and so that was a real revelation to make that first trip to Africa. It was one of those life-affirming trips, I tell you, Bret.
I bet it was, but it must have been pretty intense. I remember you told me the story about being in that space where the future slaves were kept just before they went on the boat. It's kind of like going to a concentration camp now.
Right, exactly. Going and being at that, what they call the door of no return, which was the door at which they were exited to get on the ships. So, incredible. It's just incredible to go to Africa at any time and in any part of Africa.
Well, Americans don't know very much about Africa. Perhaps in the coming years, our knowledge and our interface with Africa will develop. Impossible to tell. But certainly some incredible creativity has come from the African content. Here's a question for Willard from Neil. Where is your book on sale?
The book is on sale. You can get it on Amazon readily. And that's certainly the best place to get it now in this pandemic, because we're all buying things online now. But you can get it on Amazon, and you can get it at reputable booksellers who do keep books in stock and try to maintain a certain cultural balance in the books that they keep on stock. But my first recommendation is to go to Amazon. It's called African Rhythms.
And one of the things I love about the book is that it's composed by Randy Weston, but arranged by Willard Jenkins. How did you guys come up with that?
Well, it's an autobiography. It's the autobiography of Randy Weston. And generally, when you see autobiographies at booksellers or online or whatever, or the autobiographies that you may have in your own library at home, you see invariably they'll read like by whoever the subject is, with so and so and so and so, a writer who assisted in the project, or by the subject as told to a certain writer, etc. And I wanted to differ from that just a little bit because of the nature of our project, because I did all the writing and he edited as he saw fit and inserted certain things that he wanted to expound upon, and that's how we went about it. We would do these interviews, and I would very extensive interviews, and I would transcribe the interviews and send a transcript for him because I knew with the way his recall was and with the major storyteller that he was, that he would read these things and they would take him down other avenues. They would open up other avenues for discussion. So I'd send him these transcripts and he would make notations and whatnot. And then I would write chapters. And one of the interviews, several of the interviews we did were about a very important woman in his life. And that is a great jazz master. She is an NEA jazz master. She was originally a trombonist, but her greatness mainly stemmed from being a great arranger and composer, and that's Melba Liston. She worked with Randy Weston for many years as his composer, in much the same manner that Billy Strayhorn worked with Duke Ellington as his right-hand composer. And so when it came time to interview Randy extensively about his relationship with Randy, as I was listening to Randy respond to my various questions, my mind was working and I'm thinking, wow, the way he's describing his working relationship with Melba is the same as our working relationship on this book. And so since Randy is a major composer, Melba was his arranger, I went to him one day and I said, how about if we call this book Composed by Randy Weston, Arranged by Willard Jenkins? And he loved the idea. So that's how that came about. I just, it was just kind of put a little bit of a unique touch to the whole book package. Absolutely. Yes, and the DC Jazz Fest from Home series is available on the DC Jazz Festival YouTube channel.
Okay.
Every Saturday night at 7 p.m.
Okay,
and thank you, Bret. I always appreciate your deep dedication to this music and to getting the word out there. Much appreciated. Kudos to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Willard. I realized what I just said was not heard. The microphone was off. Thank you, Neil, for giving me the message here. But I just wanted to say that I wanted to thank Willard, which you've already done, and recommend you visit his website and his DC Jazz Festival link for the Saturday Night Series. So we're going to go out with a little Randy Weston, and we'll see you on Monday with Latin jazz trumpeter Ray Vega. Thank you to everyone who's been supporting my work. The feedback has just been fantastic. When I started as a filmmaker 53 years ago, it was an entirely different world. There weren't really many independent films or independent record labels or distribution outlets for creativity. Everything's been flipped completely now because of technology and the internet. So I'm very lucky to have a direct lifeline to my audience, and that work's coming to me as well. Both here on YouTube and on Facebook and Twitter, I get a chance to communicate with people who watch my work. They love it or they hate it. Not too many haters. I've had some though. I enjoy the haters actually. Some people, some of the bizarre comments I've received, like, why are you pimping Sonny Rollins? Why? I don't pimp Sonny Rollins. Or here's one of my favorites. Dear nigger-loving kike. Well, actually, just the wrong words, but I do love black people and I am a Jew, but that's not a really good way to say it. In any event, sticks and stones can break your bones, but words don't really bother me. Even a negative comment makes me laugh. However, one thing that I do need is some support of my work financially, so I'm taking this time to ask you to go down to the links in the bottom of the description field. PayPal, GoFundMe, Patreon, even as low as just $1 at one point. I have 10 or 15,000 views every day on the web for my videos. If every one of those people, or 10% of those people, sent me $1, that would go a long way towards funding what I'm doing. But I don't do this for the money, and no matter what happens, as long as I'm on the earth, I'm going to keep making videos and being part of the jazz community, which is so important to me, especially in these times. I think that community is a basic human need. And I was lucky at a young age to become part of the jazz community. You know, when I was a teenager, I was listening to the music and I started to come to New York. And I was from suburbia, from West Hartford, Connecticut. And I would go into the Vanguard, the kitchen of the Vanguard, and I would hang out there, just be a fly on the wall. And I was so moved by the way musicians communicated, the humor, the love between them. And it's something that's sometimes hard to find. So being part of this community is really important to me, and you are really important to me as part of the community as well. So thank you for supporting my work. Thank you for viewing the videos, for telling your friends, and bringing some of this joy into your lives, especially in such a troubled time.